All right. God save the Queen, man.
This is my video update from Larnaca, Cyprus on this Saturday morning, June the 17th. Let's talk about some news. And right now I am at the Mackenzie beach area here in Larnaca. This area is named after the famous man from Scotland, Mr. Mackenzie, who had a dream to move to Cyprus and open up a pub. And his pub was so popular that everyone in Larnaca would say after work, let's go to Mackenzie's pub. And before you knew it, the entire area was just called Mackenzie Beach. So this man had a dream to come to Cyprus, open up a pub, and he didn't just open up a pub, he had an entire area on this island named after him. So that is the story behind Mr. Mackenzie and his pub. Let's now talk about what happened in Poland as the South African delegation, including President Ramaphosa, they flew to Poland, or they stopped in Poland on their way to Kiev. And when their plane landed in Poland, the Polish authorities, they prevented 120 passengers in the South African delegation. They prevented them from leaving the plane. Now, this delegation was on its way to Kiev in order to talk about the peace deal between Ukraine and Russia that African nations have put together. And the Polish authorities, they let the leader of South Africa, along with some of his ministers and the main delegation, they let them travel onwards to Kiev. But 120 people in the entourage, journalists and security detail, they were prevented from leaving the plane. I've heard reports that the Polish authorities, they had them sit on the plane for around 9 to 10 hours. Now, the reason that Poland has given for preventing these people from leaving the plane is they claim that there were some passengers on this plane who were not declared. And they also claim that they found a bunch of containers with weapons, handguns and stuff like that. That was also not declared to the Polish authorities. Now, the South African delegation, they claim that this was done as a way to try and sabotage the South African leader's visit to Kiev. This was done because South Africa is a BRICS nation. South Africa is neutral in this conflict. And some ministers, they said that this was also done as a racist act as well. 20 journalists, security detail, the security detail of the president, his own security detail, his personal security, they were actually searched when they landed in Poland and they had their weapons taken away. So that is the story from both sides. The Polish officials, they say that there was a whole bunch of undeclared weapons and people on this flight. The South Africans say that this was done as a way to make the trip of the delegation more difficult on their way to Kiev. What's the truth here? Who knows? But let me give you my thoughts. I've never heard of another instance where South African diplomats, and they have a top-notch diplomatic corps, I've never heard of an instance where they've traveled to a country and this has happened. So I don't understand why, in this instance, the Polish authorities stopped them, or why, in this instance, the entourage that was accompanying the president was prevented from leaving the plane because of weapons or undeclared individuals. I would think that if there were weapons that were not declared or individuals that were not on the list, I would think this would be a pretty easy solution for the Polish authorities to solve within a matter of an hour or two, and then the delegation can move onwards to Kiev. So I don't quite understand what the reasons were for keeping them grounded for 9 hours. It's also interesting that they were allowed to leave the plane after the meetings in Kiev concluded. I found this to be an interesting coincidence as well. And then when Ramaphosa and his entourage were in Kiev, there was all kinds of interesting, weird things taking place. All of a sudden, it got very windy, including an instance where the delegation was meeting with Zelensky and his officials, and an air raid sirens alarms went off, and the South African delegation, as these air raid sirens were going off, they claimed that they didn't see any explosions or any danger when they were in Kiev. They were like, what's happening? Because the media was saying that the Russians were attacking and they were hitting Kiev, and the South African delegation was like, we didn't see anything. And they're on record. I mean, they've given statements to the media saying as much. They didn't see any types of bombings or explosions or anything when they were in Kiev. And the interesting part about this is that there's going to be new apartments here. Right here, they're going to build new apartments. And your view is going to be this. This will be a nice place to hang out. The interesting part about this story is that you would have to be pretty mentally challenged, pretty propagandized to believe that Russia, a fellow BRICS member, a country that has excellent relations with South Africa, would attack Kiev at the same time that the South African delegation was in Kiev. You know, Russia never would strike at Kiev when you had Collective West officials visiting. You never heard of stories of Collective West officials being taken to bunkers or stuff like that when they visited Kiev. When Rutte or Trudeau visits Kiev, you don't have any of this stuff. The Russians, there's no explosions going on. But for South Africa, when they visited Kiev, the Russians decided to attack Kiev. It doesn't make any sense at all. I highly doubt that happened. And then you have the eyewitness testimony and statements from South African leadership, which says nothing happened. Why do you have alarms and sirens going off? Nothing is happening. So what do I think is at play here? Maybe South Africa, the delegation had some people that were not declared, or maybe they had some weapons not declared. But like I said earlier in the video, this would be a really easy problem to solve. You don't need to keep 120 people, including journalists, grounded for 9-10 hours and prevented from accompanying the ice cream truck, accompanying the president and his delegation to Kiev. Doesn't make any sense. Why would you prevent journalists? If there's a couple of individuals not on the list, keep them on the plane. If there's some weapons that shouldn't be on the plane, hold those weapons. So I don't know. The story from Poland doesn't quite add up. What I think was going on is that the leadership in Poland, they got the orders from the State Department. That would be my guess, and they told them to hold the South African delegation, including Ramaphosa's security and the South African journalists, because you don't want the journalists in Kiev reporting on what's going on, right? You don't want a different narrative. You want to obtain narrative control, and the plan was to have Ramaphosa and his team in Kiev without their security, without their media, so that Zelensky and his team, they could do with the South African delegation as they wish, including sounding sirens and alarms and taking them into bunkers and creating this spectacle. And I think that was the purpose of all of this. That's what I think was the reason for not letting Ramaphosa's security and, more importantly, the 20 journalists off the plane and accompanying the South African president. Poland got the orders, hold them until the meeting is over with. And when the South African delegation is in Kiev, we can start up the show, right? We can sound the alarms. The Russians are bombing, take them to bunkers. All of these things, have the media report that Russia bombs Kiev while South African delegation is in Kiev, putting them in danger. Russia bombs Kiev while their own BRICS ally is visiting, bringing in a peace deal with them. You know, they can create all these narratives. And maybe they actually thought that they can drive a wedge between South Africa and Russia. Maybe they thought they can fool the South African officials into actually believing that Russia was bombing Kiev while they were in the city. So that's what I think happened. Anyway, an interesting development, an interesting story. It is very windy, so let's walk here, and I'm going to stop somewhere and put on my wind guard, my dead cat on my mic. Where are the people, Alex? Where are the people in Cyprus? They're all at the beach. They're all at the beach, man. That's where they all are. I'm going to find a place to get set up. So I'm going to go off screen for a minute as I put my mic on. I just got to find a place, and I will be back because it is very, very windy here. Let's see. Just go over here. All right, I'll be right back. All right, I am back, and the sound should be a whole lot better as we continue with our video. Continue onwards and upwards, talking about what is going on in the news. And let's now talk about the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, because we had all kinds of interesting statements from the SPIEF, including statements from the Russian President Vladimir Putin. We had statements from the Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and from the Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova. And let's start things off with what Putin said during his speech that he gave at the SPIEF and his Q&A session. Now, RT, they did a really good job highlighting the main points of Putin's Q&A and his speech in St. Petersburg. And I am going to to talk about these main points that RT has highlighted. And the first main point from Putin's Q&A was that the Ukrainian counteroffensive is yielding heavy losses for Ukraine and no gains. Putin said that to date, Kiev's forces have lost some 186 tanks and 418 armored vehicles of other types. Quote, their losses are very heavy, about more than 1 in 10 compared to the Russian army. That is a fact. In terms of hardware, the loss of this equipment is growing every day, Putin said, adding that Kiev has thus far failed to achieve its goals, wasting its strategic reserves in the push against Russia's forces. And Putin is 100% spot on. We've talked about the catastrophic failed counteroffensive on this channel in multiple videos. Alexander has talked about the counteroffensive in great detail on his channel, and on the Duran channel we have talked about the failure of the big counteroffensive as well. And the counteroffensive, you know, it was supposed to be a 3 to 5 day sprint where the Ukraine military was going to make a big push to the Sea of Azov. It was going to split the land corridor in the south, and it was going to split up Russian forces and split up Russian logistics and supply lines. And the Ukraine military, after 5 days, was then going to make a move towards Crimea. It was going to attack Crimea, forcing the Putin government to capitulate, and perhaps even resulting in some sort of regime change in Moscow. That was the goal of this counteroffensive. It was going to be a 3 to 5 day sprint, and then it was going to put Crimea in jeopardy, and eventually it was going to put the Putin government in jeopardy. But that has all failed now. We are 2 weeks into this, and the most optimistic reports that I'm getting for the Ukraine military is that they have gained around 100 to 200 meters of some abandoned villages and dachas in I believe, the Zaporozhye direction. That's the best case scenario for the Ukraine military. And we've all seen the photos of burnt out Leopards, Ukrainian Leopards, not German Leopards. We've all seen the photos of the destroyed Leopard tanks and the Bradleys and the French wheeled tanks. And we've heard the reports about even the rumors, let's not say reports, the rumors about Ukraine military actually surrendering to the Russians because they don't want to be forced to go on this big counteroffensive and put themselves in the path of Russian artillery and the Russian military. So we've heard all of these things. We've documented all these things. The narrative has indeed shifted for the collective West. They claim that this is not a sprint anymore. This is a marathon. This is going to be a long, long-term process. That is what the collective West is now claiming. So they've just shifted the media narrative of the big counteroffensive. It's not a sprint. It's a marathon. It's going to take a long, 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 long time to play out. But we all know the truth. The Russian president knows the truth as well. So that's the first point that he made from the Q&A session at the SPIEF. Putin then said that Western military aid will not help Ukraine. He said any weaponry Kiev receives from the collective West will end up destroyed. Putin warned tanks are burning. Among them are the Leopards. They burn, so will the F-16s. There is no doubt, Putin said. So they can supply the F-16s, but the Russians, they're very confident that they will be able to destroy these F-16s and any wonder weapons that the collective West sends to Kiev. The Russians are very confident that they will be able to handle these wonder weapons in much the same way that they took care of the wonder weapon Leopard tanks. The water is awesome. Very, very refreshing. This is actually the first time that I've entered the beach. So it feels good. It feels good. Another thing that Putin said connected to the F-16s, he said that NATO's involvement in this conflict is deepening, and giving Ukraine the F-16s will indeed be an escalation, but it will be an escalation not because of the actual fighter jets, but because of where the fighter jets may actually take off from. The F-16s may end up stationed abroad while only operating in Ukraine's airspace during combat sorties, Putin said. In such an event, we will need to look at how and where we can hit those assets used in combat operations against us, Putin said. This is a serious danger of further dragging NATO into this armed conflict. Absolutely. Absolutely, this is a huge danger, because if the plan is indeed to have the F-16s fly out of, say countries in Eastern Europe, let's say Poland, Romania, Slovakia, I don't know. If this is the plan, then what Putin is saying is that the Russian military is going to have to evaluate what they need to do in order to prevent these F-16s from taking off from airfields in Eastern European countries and NATO member states. That is a huge danger, a huge risk, and a huge escalation, which leads me to believe that the neocons, the push by the neocons to get F-16s to the Ukraine military is not so much about the F-16 as a wonder weapon. The neocons, they know that the Russians will take care of the F-16s in much the same way that they took care of the Leopard tanks. The main reason that the neocons may want to get F-16s to Ukraine is more to do with having the F-16s take off from NATO member states' airfields. That may be the real reason why the neocons want these F-16s to given to Ukraine, so that they can draw NATO into this conflict by forcing various NATO member states to fly these F-16s from their airfields, which would then push Russia, bait Russia, that's a better word, would then bait Russia into perhaps having to strike at these air bases in NATO, which would then put everyone at risk of a NATO-Russia conflict. So that may be the real reason why the neocons want F-16s to Ukraine. And another thing that Putin said is that the West will want to talk to Russia on security guarantees regarding whether it is needed to conduct a dialogue with them or not. I repeat once again, we did not reject this dialogue. It was them who decided to sever this dialogue with us. Well, they don't want to talk, whatever. They will. Basically, Putin is saying that eventually, because Russia is winning, and because they are destroying NATO weapons, the Russian economy is about to enter growth. The economies of the collective West are either entering recession or are in deep recession. They are being demilitarized. In Germany's case, they are being deindustrialized. Ukraine's economy is just not even existing. It's non-existent. Putin said eventually the collective West will have to speak with Russia. As much as they don't want to negotiate with Russia, eventually, according to Putin, they will. And then on the issue of nuclear weapons, Putin warned the very fact of discussing this topic of nuclear weapons already lowers the threshold for their use. And Putin rejected the idea of engaging in any nuclear disarmament talks with the West. Quote, "We possess more weaponry of such sort than the NATO countries. They know that, and they are always trying to persuade us to start negotiations on reductions. Nuts to them. you know, as our people say, actually, I think Putin said an even worse word than nuts to them. I think he said a kind of bad word, a naughty word, when he was talking about nuclear weapons. But Putin is right. Russia has, they wanted to negotiate on nuclear weapons, but the US has pulled out of all of the strategic arms agreements over the past years. And I think Russia is just like, you know what, just forget about it. We're done talking about nuclear weapons. And the dangerous part about nuclear weapons, according to Putin, and here he is spot on, is that just the talk of nuclear weapons, writing articles about giving tactical nukes to Ukraine, and constantly going on and on about nuclear weapons and how Russia is going to use nuclear weapons. Putin is basically saying that this is projection, and what the collective West is doing is they're preparing their population for the possibility of them actually using nuclear weapons in this conflict. They're trying to condition their citizens to actually go with and believe that nuclear weapons can be used without putting a risk to the planet, and that using nuclear weapons or using something like tactical nukes or handing over tactical nukes to Ukraine would not put the collective West at any risk. Putin is right about this. Talking about nuclear weapons continuously and consistently is a way to try and assimilate the collective West population into the belief that nuclear weapons are not as dangerous as we once thought they were, and that nuclear weapons can be used to engage the Russian military and even defeat the Russian military. And Putin said this is a very dangerous thing. So basically, let's just stop talking about nuclear weapons. Russia is not going to use nuclear weapons. They're not interested in using nuclear weapons. The collective West should get this whole nuclear weapons can be used idea out of their mind. It's dangerous. It's reckless. It puts the entire planet at risk. And we should stop talking about the use of nuclear weapons. Putin is 100% right. And from Putin, we move on to the foreign minister, Lavrov. And he gave some very interesting comments to RT on the sidelines of the SPIEF. And he told RT about, he talked to RT about BRICS. Lavrov said that Egypt, Algeria, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and soon Syria. Syria is also going to join BRICS. They have their eye on joining BRICS. He said that these nations are all very strong. They are all very strong countries. That's what Lavrov said. And they are all leaders to some extent in the Arab and Islamic world. This will undoubtedly enrich BRICS. That is what Lavrov said about these countries entering BRICS. Once again, Egypt, Algeria, United Arab Emirates, and Saudi Arabia, and very soon Syria. These are all countries that will most likely be joining BRICS in the near term. And then Lavrov talked about the proxy war. Lavrov described it as the West's proxy war with Russia. And he said that this proxy war is, and I quote, a geopolitical conflict in which the US was attempting to eliminate a powerful competitor and preserve its hegemonic position by all means. Lavrov said that the attempt is futile, and we all know this. And he added that Ukraine and its backers will be forced to accept new concrete realities before a ceasefire is reached. So Lavrov told RT that at first, the collective West and Ukraine, they had the Minsk agreements, and the Minsk agreements were very favorable to the Zelensky regime and to Ukraine. The airport, by the way, is right over here. So all the planes, when you're at the beach here at Mackenzie, the planes just fly right over you. Then they land at the international airport, which is maybe like a 5-minute drive from here. So Lavrov told RT, look, the Minsk agreements, Minsk 1 and Minsk 2, were favorable to Ukraine. They actually even stated that Lugansk and Donetsk would be part of Ukraine as autonomous republics in a federated Ukraine, but they were part of Ukraine. Now that the collective West has escalated this conflict with Russia, they need to now accept not only that Donetsk and Lugansk are part of the Russian Federation, but they now have to accept, according to Lavrov in his statement to RT, that Zaporozhye and Kherson are part of the Russian Federation. And Lavrov warned the collective West that if they keep escalating and they keep pushing, more regions, more areas will be part of the Russian Federation, and the collective West sooner or later will have to capitulate, and they will have to agree to more regions and areas as being recognized as part of the Russian Federation, and they will have no choice but to agree to this. So the more that they escalate, the more they push, the worse it's going to get for the collective West, and the worse it's going to get for the Zelensky regime and Ukraine. So that was Lavrov's warning, which is in line with what Putin said in his Q&A. And then Lavrov said that Russia won't be prepared to let security guarantees be based on more pledges and promises or even documents the West may offer us. He said that Russia must guarantee our own national security on our own. We fully understand that we can only rely on ourselves and build relations only with countries open to an equal and mutually beneficial partnership. Lavrov continued by saying this is not what we see in the West these days. And Lavrov declared the era in which the US and its allies control the institutions of globalization, primarily development banks and multilateral organizations, will come to a close. That is what he said. The IMF and the World Bank and all of these globalist organizations, according to Lavrov, will either will either wind down or will face competition by these new BRICS organizations like the SCO and the BRICS Bank and stuff like this. So that is what Lavrov said. Look, he's also right with regards to when the time comes to negotiate with the collective West and to talk about security guarantees or a security umbrella for, say, Europe. Russia is not going to just take the collective West's words and promises. They're not even going to accept, I imagine they're not even going to accept certain forms or certain types of documents or treaties. I think Russia is going to ask for a whole lot more in order to make sure that NATO isn't going to expand further, and there aren't going to be any more threats to Russia's national security and interests. And in this statement, I think now Lavrov is kind of even hinting at perhaps a rollback of NATO and buffer zones in Ukraine. I think that's what he's hinting at. It's not only about treaties or agreements or, promises of not moving one more inch to the east. It looks like Russia's not going to accept any of that, and they're going to want certain buffer areas in place in order to protect their sovereignty. That's what I got from this statement from Lavrov. And we had Maria Zakharova, the foreign ministry spokeswoman. She actually said something very interesting to the media. She claims that the countries that took part in the SPIEF, they were actually threatened by the United States and NATO not to attend in a type of mafia tactic. They were warned that if they sent a delegation to the St. Petersburg Forum, then they would face consequences, economic consequences, sanctions, who knows? But Maria Zakharova actually says that Russia even has the receipts, the paperwork and the receipts of these threats made by the US and by NATO to countries not. So as countries do not attend the forum. And this makes sense. If you want my take on this, it makes sense because the collective West, they absolutely wanted the St. Petersburg Forum to be a failure so that it would be embarrassing to Putin, to Russia, and so that they can continue with the narrative that sanctions are working and Russia is isolated. And so they would have absolutely have loved to have seen, I don't know, 1,000 people at the St. Petersburg Forum and maybe something like 5 or 10 countries in attendance. But instead what they got was 130 plus countries in attendance and something like 16 to 17,000 delegates attending the St. Petersburg International Forum, as well as a whole bunch of new BRICS members and all kinds of business deals being signed and trade deals, and a huge success, just a huge success, showing that Russia is not isolated in the collective West. They have no way of spinning this to make it seem like Russia is isolated. They can't do it. And they would have liked to have done it, but they can't do it. And Maria Zakharova, she is saying that there was a lot of pressure on countries to not attend, but they attended anyway. The pressure was still on, Zakharova said. We have information on how literally every country was processed. Letters were written. During the meetings, they were threatened. Of course the leaders did this. This is the United States. The atmosphere was formed in general by NATO-centric countries, instilling the idea that it is impossible to go to the forum, that they will face the consequences, that the next, so to speak, package of sanctions is just around the corner, and that everyone should think carefully before participating in events on the territory of Russia. So a lot of people ask if European countries are in attendance. I think Serbia had a delegation there. I'm not 100% certain of this, but I believe Serbia was in attendance. And I definitely know that Hungary was in attendance because Peter Szijjártó gave many statements from St. Petersburg. He talked about a ceasefire. He talked about the sanctions and how they're harming Europe. He talked about energy security. So the very capable and very professional foreign minister of Hungary was in attendance. So as far as EU countries go, Hungary did attend the St. Petersburg Forum, and I'm sure that Hungary had a lot of pressure placed on it so as to not attend the forum. But Hungary, you know, they are a sovereign nation, and they will act in what they consider to be their best interests, and so they attended the forum, and they actually sent one of their highest level officials to the forum in the form of the foreign minister, Peter Szijjártó. So let's, before we get to our clown world, I was going to say, let's do a clown world. Before we get to our clown world, let me see, how are we doing on time? All right, we're pretty good on time. This is going to be a hotel, I think. It's going to be a new hotel in Larnaca that's being built. So before we get to a clown world, let's talk about a real quick story about Nuland and Seymour Hersh. He posted on his Substack a report about what is happening at the U.S. State Department. And Seymour Hersh, he is saying that Wendy Sherman, the number 2 official at the U.S. State Department, she is on her way out. She is actually, it seems like she's being purged from the State Department because she's not hawkish enough as far as Russia and Ukraine goes. And the neocons, they're getting rid of her in order to make way for even more hawkish officials at state. And according to Seymour Hersh, the person that is going to take over for Wendy Sherman and be the second in command at the U.S. State Department is none other than Victoria Nuland. This is very, very bad news for the United States, very bad news for the conflict in Ukraine, and very bad news for the entire world. Very bad news for Europe and the EU, because we all know how Nuland feels about the EU, don't we? So very bad news for the European Union. But let's do a clown world and wrap this video up. And this clown world comes from Zelensky and his his daily, nightly Instagram, TikTok updates that he performs. And in this update, Zelensky, oh, by the way, before I get into his update, Zelensky told South Africa when they were in Kiev, he said that he doesn't agree to any type of peace deal. He said any type of secession and hostilities is a freeze in the conflict, and he doesn't agree to it. And the European Union, they also came out with a statement, and they rejected the plan from Africa for secession to hostilities. They claim that a secession to hostilities is a freezing of the conflict, and they don't want any of that. They want to keep this conflict going because the neocons, they want to escalate. They want all-out war with Russia. And people like Jake Sullivan, who is nothing more than a campaign manager. Yes, he's the national security guy, but he's really not a national security guy. He's not an intel guy. He's not a diplomat. He's a campaign guy. He's a campaign manager. And Sullivan, he wants to find a way to keep this conflict going, at least until after the elections. So he's going to do his best to get military aid and money to Ukraine so that they can keep this conflict running until at least November 2024, so as to avoid catastrophe and Afghanistan-like debacle for Biden as he campaigns for re-election. Anyway, Zelensky, he gave his nightly message to the people of Instagram and TikTok, and Zelensky said that he had a meeting to plan out the next wave, the next moves of the big counteroffensive, which is a marathon now, it's not a sprint. And at this meeting was Zelensky. According to Zelensky, Zelensky took part in this meeting. I don't know how he took part or in what form he took part, but according to Zelensky, Zelensky is all good, he's all well, and he was actually at this meeting planning out the next phase of the counteroffensive. And we also have a statement from the Ukraine Intel Services, the GUR. They issued a statement, and they said that all the rumors about Budanov are nonsense. They said that Budanov is working every day. He's in his office. Business as usual. All is good with Budanov. That is the statement that the GUR Ukraine Intel made the other day, because there are now new rumors which claim that Budanov was actually flown to a hospital in Berlin to seek medical treatment. But the Ukraine Intel Services say this is nonsense. Budanov is at the office, and he is conducting business, a busy bee, working every day from his offices. Those are the statements from the Ukraine Intel Services. Anyway, that is the video, everybody. Incredible stuff, huh? I think we have to believe these statements from Zelensky and Ukraine Intel Services in much the same way that we should believe the Zelensky regime when they claim that Russia started to attack Kiev when the South African delegation was visiting. So we should absolutely believe these statements from Zelensky and from Ukraine Intelligence Services. That's the video, everybody. The Duran.locals.com. We are on Rumble, ODYSEE, BitChute, Telegram, and Rockfin. And go to the Duran shop. Maybe pick up a Duran baseball hat. My hat today is the flag of Greece. 10% off. Use the code Good Day Summer Giveaway on the Duran Shop Instagram channel. The link is in the description box down below for free merch, to get a chance at winning free merch from Duran Shop. Take care, everybody.